New Thought Media Network proudly presents a weekly exploration of various spiritual practices with renowned spiritual authors, coaches, teachers, and Dr. Tracy Brown, RScP.
And now, here's Tracy.
It's Tracy. Yes, that would be me, Tracy Brown. And you are here with Poetry, Prayer, and Practice, where every week we jump in and spend a little time enjoying some poetry, talking about prayer, and exploring spiritual practices that help us live lives we love. And today I'm starting with a poem. This is a poem by Shalane Harkin. I should have asked you to guess who I was going to read a poem by. Shalane Harkin would be an easy guess for some of you who know how much I love her poetry. Shalane Harkin, the mystic poet. This poem is titled A Total Breakdown. She's having a total breakdown. One put together and very self-satisfied seed with no cracks in it whispered to another about a third seed who had begun to germinate. She's completely falling apart. Her life is a mess. They gazed superiorly at the smooth, intact facade of their shells that so perfectly upheld the expectations of the status quo. Clearly, compared to that wild sprouting seed disrupting the peace, they were doing something right? But now and then, they secretly looked up with longing at the tall-stemmed, beautiful, and brave opened flower nearby, wondering if there might be more to themselves. And one day, when the inward agony of maintaining the appearance of an outwardly perfect and tidy life became too much, the seed scooched herself close to the flower and asked in a hushed voice, "How do I become more like you?" And the flower smiled and said, "You must first be willing to have a total breakdown of every identity you've known. And then you must be so bold as to let your previously predictable life become a wild, sacred mess." Shalane Harkin, A Total Breakdown. And this particular poem is in the book Bouquet of Stars, with Shalane Harkin, the mystic poet, and a dozen other poets, including me. And I love that poem. Why did I choose to start today's show with that poem? I love this idea that there are times when we must stop trying to just look like or satisfy or appease the status quo. There are times when we must let our life and everything that we've known before have the appearance of falling apart. The last two lines, let your previously predictable life become a wild, sacred mess. There's so much I love about this poem. I especially love it today because we're nearing the end of Mental Health Awareness Month, the month of May. And a big part of Mental Health Awareness Month is reminding us that not only do we need to, not only is it okay to, but we need to express our emotions. We need to process our emotions. We need to use our emotions to guide us into, or to warn us that something's not working, or to guide us into our next expression, our next evolution. And I was in a conversation with someone over the weekend, and it became really clear to me again how often we use our spiritual principles and practices to ignore our emotions. Let me say that again. I see it a lot that people will use the spiritual principles or their spiritual practices to avoid the emotions, especially the emotions that they have some negative judgment about, or they believe society has a negative judgment about, like sadness or grief or anger or fear, right? Jealousy. We feel these things as human beings, and they are like road signs. They're like road signs to let us know how we are engaging with the world or what is happening. How I am feeling is important. It is an important indicator. It is an important ingredient in my overall experience. It is an important warning sign sometimes to let me know I need to shift people or environment or choices. There are no bad emotions. Now, I'm giving you the Tracy Brown theory on this. I don't think there are any bad emotions. I don't think they're bad feelings. I think what happens is we have bought into a narrative that if we have these quote unquote bad feelings, we are a bad person and we have not done our spiritual work. And you've heard me say it before. Our spiritual practices are not designed to have us escape the human experience. Our spiritual practices are designed to help us navigate the human experience. Understanding and knowing spiritual principle is helpful to help us or to guide us back to the true essential nature of our life or our lives. You could pray 15 times a day. That doesn't mean you will never get laid off, or you will never have a divorce. You will never go into bankruptcy. You will never fall down and break your leg. You will no. You could pray 15 times a day. It doesn't guarantee that you will not have something happen to you that you don't like or that you would not choose. That's not why we have spiritual practice. So with poetry, prayer, and practice, we're always trying to remember that we have many different entryways into our spiritual practice, and that then when we integrate that and these practices into our lives, we understand spiritual principle better. we can model and demonstrate spiritual principle better, and we can return ourselves to center faster because we have multiple pathways that will help us do so. So I hope this makes sense. You know, the Rumi poem comes to mind for me as well, that is the constant reminder that our emotions are not bad. They come and they can go. And what if we treated ourselves as if we were a guest house, and that we we invited these guests, these emotions, these feelings, these experiences into our lives, but we didn't get attached to them, right? When you have relatives that come and maybe come for the holiday and they stay at your house, and they're relatives who you wouldn't necessarily be around every week, but once a year they come for Thanksgiving, and you have 3 bedrooms, so a couple of them stay with you. Yeah. And after 3 days, you're like, okay, yeah, I'm glad this weekend is over. You can go. They visited. And you also have relatives you love a lot, and they visit. And at the end of 3 days, you might be saying, oh, I wish you would stay forever. But they're saying, oh, we have to go back to our homes and our cities and our jobs and the things that we normally do. They come, but they don't come to stay either. They come and they go. So this conversation I was in over the weekend was just really like, almost like, like I could feel like I just ran right into something solid again. It's not the first time, and I'm sure it won't be the last, but it just struck me. And the conversation really was around, it started around grief. And someone who really believes what we teach about the immortality of life was really struggling with this idea of death and grieving, feeling grief and fear around her own death, as well as death in general. And at first I thought it was just like a sadness around grief, around death itself, around not being able to fulfill dreams or promises, because when I die in this form, when this body dies and I transition into whatever is next, I will not have been able, to go here or do that, or, do what I promised to do for my sister, or right. So that made sense to me. And I thought we were going to be talking about that. But then as she kept talking, what I realized was it wasn't only that there was an equal part that was, I'm surprised that I feel this sadness because I know better. I know that our lives are immortal. I know that we are always connected. I mean, all the things that we teach in New Thought, in metaphysics. So we dug into that a little bit, and I was like, oh, it was like she was saying, I've practiced metaphysics for several decades, and I should be beyond this sadness. I shouldn't be feeling sadness. I shouldn't be feeling grief. I'm a good metaphysician. I'm better than this. And so that actually was bigger than what I thought it was initially, than what I thought the focus was initially. And it was like judgment of ourselves because we're having a human experience, thinking that our spiritual practice and spiritual understanding prevents us from having the human experience. And if that's true in one place, it's probably true in many other places too. And so, whether it's grief, whether it's sadness, whether it's fear, whether it's anger, whether it's jealousy, whether it's any other feeling that you may have labeled as bad or negative, it's like, no, no, no. If you believe, or if you are acting as if you believe, you shouldn't feel those things because you are a good Christian, or you are a good science of mind student, or you are a good unity student, or you are good anything, divine science, right? You are a good Fillmorian, right? You understand spiritual principle. So you shouldn't feel these things. And what you're actually doing is a form of spiritual bypass. Pretending that spiritual practice or principle erases the human experience. So I'm just taking a breath there because I want that to sink in for a minute. I am not a bad person because I experience anger when someone does something that is hurtful or harmful to me or other people. I then must ask myself, what will I do with or about this anger? Now, if I respond in behavior that is representing the anger, or right, if I respond and I'm yelling and screaming, or I respond with physical violence, then now I am out of alignment with what I know my spiritual truth is. But that doesn't mean I'm weak or wrong for being angry. Something happened and it was worth anger. The anger is the indicator that there has been a line crossed, that there has been disrespect, or there has been, especially if there's fear and anger, maybe I'm afraid because I was actually threatened. And I am supposed to experience fear, or I'm supposed to experience anger. It doesn't become a problem until I let that emotion drive my behavior, what I say and do. And if the behavior is out of alignment with the true essential nature of who I am and who I choose to be in the world, now we have a problem. Now I may have something to judge myself about and ultimately forgive myself about, but it's not the emotion that's bad. What can happen is if I let the emotion drive my behavior and I don't make a conscious choice, then that may create a problem for me. And especially if that is a continued pattern over time. Does this make sense? Like, are you tracking with me how the emotion itself is valuable? The emotion is great, but what do we do once we experience the emotion? I was having a conversation with a different person. This was maybe a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. And it was similar in the context of they were judging the emotion of being angry as bad. Like, and then they were a bad person because they got so angry. And then number three, they lashed out at the person who made them angry. And then four, they were really upset with themselves and a little afraid that they could respond so angrily to someone. They could react so angrily to someone. So now you've got four levels. Person A said and did something. Person B didn't like it and got angry. Person B then acted from anger in a retaliatory way with person A. And then person B felt bad about it and felt they were a bad person for being angry in the first place. And then an even worse person because they felt bad about what they did, the action they took. Snowball effect, right? Snowball, it snowballed, it snowballed, it snowballed. But the being angry wasn't the problem. Anger is an emotion that we as human beings have to let us know a line has been crossed, something has been violated that we care about. But if we move to revenge, if we move to holding a grudge, if our behavior is that, well, now I'm going to get back at that person, or I'm going to make them feel as bad as they made me feel, like that's what's going to even the scale here. No, no, no. They made you mad. They did something incorrect. But for me, then my choice is, what do I do next? Do I walk away? Do I give them feedback about that wasn't acceptable to me, but do it in a calm way? Do I respond in a way that is a demonstration of love, even in their demonstration of anger or hate or disregard or disrespect? I mean, I have a lot of choices. I don't automatically have to return the energy that came my way. I don't have to respond in that same energy. I can say I'm really angry. Oh my goodness, I'm really angry. What you just did or said, it really is upsetting to me. I'm so angry. I cannot talk to you right now. But can we come back together in 3 hours and at least have a conversation about this? I mean, that's an option. If it's somebody I'm never going to see again, I can be really angry, notice I'm really angry, and say, I'm never going to see this person again. I'm in a public setting and I'm going to walk away. Anger, somebody did something, it really made me angry. And I'll never see them again, but I need to tell them this is not acceptable behavior. I can tell them that without yelling at them, without screaming. I can ask the question, are you aware how disrespectful it is that what you just did? Are you aware, or did you do that on purpose? Like, I can ask the question, but how I respond is my responsibility, my ability to respond. And it's not just from a psychological point of view, right? This show, Poetry, Prayer, and Practice, is about how do we integrate our spiritual principles and practices into our everyday lives. So if I believe myself to be an example of spirit expressing, no matter what anyone else does to me or around me, my responsibility is to respond from a place of love, harmony, wholeness, all of that. So, what is important is that we're aware that our emotions are happening and that we don't label them as bad, and we don't label ourselves as bad. Let's go back to the first example. Again, the first example of the conversation I was in, really, we started talking about death and how sad this person was when they were just reflecting on their own death that will happen one day. They're not sick. They're not, in palliative care. They're not under hospice care. None of that. None of that. So it was just on reflecting upon death, I'm really sad. And then in talking about it, realizing the sadness was not just about dying. The sadness was, I am a spiritual person. Why am I feeling this sadness? I feel bad that I'm not living up to my spiritual standards. That's crap. Our spiritual standards are that we live fully in this human experience, which means we have every emotion. Yes, I am not doing this with my finger, but I am doing this with my voice. Every emotion has a purpose. Every emotion is valuable. Every emotion is critical for us to have the fullness of our human experience. So sometimes that means we have to fall apart, like the poem talked about, right? Sometimes that may look like we have a total breakdown, like the seed that is germinating and the other seeds going, whoa, she's completely falling apart. What? But she fell apart to become a flower. Have you had that happen to you where you have felt a lot of pain or you have gone through a really challenging situation? I've had that happen to me. I went through a period where I had a lot of financial problems and I was scared. And I had to reorder a lot of things in my life to get through that period. And in the reordering, it looked like I was falling apart. Well, or my life was falling apart, right? I had to change a lot of things. And on the other side of it, my life was so much better. It wasn't because I wasn't doing my spiritual practice. In fact, when I went through that and came out on the other side, what I realized was part of the reason it happened was to give me an opportunity to actually use my spiritual practices to navigate the human craziness, the human challenges, the human difficulties. If I did not have my spiritual practice, and if I didn't understand some of the spiritual principles that I understood at the time, I might have been completely devastated. I might have been very depressed, clinically depressed. I might have been, I might have taken 2 or 3 or 4 times longer to make the choices I made and to restructure my life in a way that made more sense, or in a way that really set me up for future success. And so on the one hand, it could have looked like everything was falling apart. It could have looked like everything was crazy. It could have I could have stayed in fear and anger, sadness. But when I realized what I felt sadness about, it drew me or it guided me to make different choices. Okay, so what do I need to do to feel joy again? What do I need to do to have this not be my new norm, right? If I felt fear or sadness, it's like, oh, all right, I do feel that. What's causing that? All right, let's move that out. Let's not create more of that. Let's create something different. So I'm just want to encourage you over the next week to think about, where have you been in denial about emotions? Where have you used spiritual bypass or spiritual principle to pretend that your human emotions are unhealthy for you? And then my request is that you stop it. Stop it. Begin to think about your emotions as resources, right? They're resources meant to engage you in your own evolution, instead of looking at your emotions as weapons designed to harm you, hurt you. I kind of like that. I might have to use that again. Your emotions are not weapons to harm you and hurt you. They really are resources to help you choose, to help you recognize what's going on and then choose. So I mentioned the Rumi poem, Guest House. So I'm going to read that too. And think about it in terms of your emotions. The Guest House by Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. The Guest House by Rumi. So that's what I want to encourage you to do. Notice each emotion, and the ones that maybe you have labeled or you feel society has labeled as bad emotions or negative emotions, stop being afraid of them. Mind them for what they bring to you and treat them like the guest they are. They don't have to move in. They're not your new roommate. You're not buying a house or condo with them and putting their name on the mortgage. They're a guest. And as a guest, you welcome them and then you allow them to leave. The danger part is noticing in your behavior, are you moving toward unhealthy actions or reactions to the emotions? If you are seeking revenge, I've got to get back at that person. If you are holding a grudge, if you feel like, well, they did that to me, so now I have to have power over them by doing the same thing or something worse. Do you feel you have to control them now? I will never let them like be in my presence again without these rules, or I have to control everything about my interaction with them. And I'm not talking about creating healthy boundaries. I'm talking about when your actions, your words and your actions all of a sudden are, you're giving them all these rules they have to follow, or you're setting up all of these barriers and boundaries beyond just simply protecting yourself, where you're really trying to control them or attacking them or shaming others because you felt shamed or you felt disrespected, shaming them or hurting them emotionally, verbally, or physically. All of those behaviors are what's unhealthy. The emotion that you are reacting to instead of responding to is not unhealthy. The emotion itself is just an emotion. It is information. And how you choose to respond is the opportunity you have to be grounded in spiritual principle as you go through your life every day. Now, if you're like me, it's not always easy. It's not always easy. And so sometimes what that means is we have to do our spiritual practice to return to center first before we respond, before we engage with the other person or the situation again. But that's my responsibility too. My ability to respond, I know when I need to do spiritual practice before I say a word or before I make a decision or before I set up the next meeting, right? No one else can tell me that, even though another practitioner or minister or right or friend may say, you need to go meditate for 15 minutes before we have this before we continue this conversation. But my job is to know that for me. Your job is to know that for yourself. How are you going to use your spiritual practice so that you don't respond to emotions that you have labeled negative in a like manner? So that's really the conversation today. I'm hoping that some of this really resonated with you and that you're too thinking about how the emotion itself is not bad. Our spiritual work is in the space between feeling the emotion and responding rather than reacting, and making the connection to the beginning. There's no better time for us to integrate our spiritual awareness with our actions than in this month of May. That is Mental Health Awareness Month. The psychology of it and the spirituality of it are both important. The psychology of it and the spirituality of what we do is important. So today in Poetry, Prayer, and Practice, that's our jam. That's our thing. How are we labeling our emotions? And are we using our emotions as the tool, a resource, or information they are designed to be? Are we giving them power that they were not designed to have, and then becoming a victim to our own story and someone who uses spiritual principle to deny what is actually going on? Lots to think about. Your homework, if you choose to accept it, is to really just reflect on, contemplate, where have you labeled emotions badly or negative, and how has that encouraged you to do spiritual bypass? And third, what do you want to change about that so that you truly can respond to all emotions from a spiritually grounded place? That is it for today's poetry, prayer, and practice. My name is Tracy Brown. I'm here every Tuesday at noon Mountain Time. And so, whatever time that is where you are, I hope that you will join me next week and every week thereafter. Bye for now.
Thanks for watching. Join us again next week. Or watch on demand at www.ntmedia.org or youtube.com/NewThoughtMedia Network. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring. Learn more at www.ntmedia.org.